Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
Not too bad. It's a good day.
Yes, it is. It's starting, fall's around the corner.
Nope, fall is here. We had the first day of fall officially on the calendar.
Yeah, but it's weather. I go by weather and experience, okay?
Okay.
We're not quite there, but we're getting there. When I start seeing 40-degree mornings and the trees are nice and colorful, then fall's here.
Yeah, but then the week after that, you get frost on everything. So,
You know, that's true. Then winter's here.
yeah, right.
So much for experience.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I got my pumpkin spice coffee here. I'm just kidding. It's not pumpkin spice, but we're 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 going to talk about this is what does the Bible say? I think we'll call it what does the Bible say about the call process. But just real quick disclaimer at the beginning here that the call process we're going to talk about here isn't stipulated in the Bible.
What do you mean that we're doing something that's not in the Bible?
Yeah, we're not. And this is one of those freedom of a Christian adiaphora things. We don't disagree with God's word about the office of the holy ministry or um,
The
the
actual
different
call itself.
the call itself, right? We
Yeah.
line ourselves up with as much as Scripture. But one of the things, much like I had a kid ask me today, what when did God create water? That's a interesting question because it never specifies in the days of creation when God created water. We know he created out of nothing, but the Bible doesn't tell us everything we want to know. And one of the things it doesn't tell us is how a congregation is supposed to receive or choose a pastor. So anyways, that caveat here, not to get it too far afield, this isn't going to be typical where we're going to all these verses that support and help answer this question, but what we hope to do is talk about the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod's call process, and it's a pertinent conversation because I'll say it because we're recording this on Thursday, but Mondays when it's being posted, and congregations should have found out yesterday. I'm staying in Toledo, so the congregation Holy Trinity down in Bowling Green, Kentucky, on September 10th met as a congregation and extended a call to me to serve as the senior pastor down there, and I went down and visited, considered whether to serve here or whether to serve there. So just going through this consideration process, it's really a timely conversation for me and Pastor Mapus, you've been a big voice in my ear and counsel for me through those things, asking a lot of questions to get me thinking. And so, yeah, that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay. Well, where do we start? Well, we'll start with you. I mean, what's this kind of, I would say, would use your experience because
Yeah,
I'm using you as you were once my vicary's supervisor. Um, is it, I want to see how you handled it because way you took the consideration of this call seriously. I think it's a good example, not only for me, for a lot of people and for
right,
also congregations. Because one of the things that I've seen is I was a layman most of my adult life involved with the church, is sometimes you hear about things where the call process is not treated very seriously, or a pastor doesn't take it very seriously and really doesn't give the time to it that the congregation calling deserves, or
right.
vice versa, right? So
Yep.
I think what your process here is a good example for all of us to follow.
Yep. No, yeah, let's talk about it. So I was born in Watseka, Illinois. I'm just kidding. I won't go all the way far back there, but kind of does play into it because I moved around a lot as a child, and my dad was a pastor, so we grew up, and he seemed to have a 5-year shelf life. It seemed like every 5 years he would take a call somewhere else, and all the way through, I was 12 years old when he moved to Milan, Michigan, and that was his longest pastorate was there in Milan. That's where I say I'm from. But anyways, I'm familiar from this more. I was more familiar with the call process that I just went through in my child's mind, and as much as I could remember it, I just knew it was something that happened in the church. And of course, I learned a lot along the way from serving here. But something that our church has done for we've basically is doing a little bit of research. We've basically held to this process that we'll talk about for 170 years, and it's CFW Walther kind of outlaid this in his church and ministry book, and it's just how our synod works. And to say that, maybe just out the gate say that this isn't the only way to do it, and that's probably already clear from what we said, that the Bible doesn't stipulate the process for this. But there's other church denominations, other church bodies that have more ecclesiastical supervision involved in the process, where the bishops or we call them district presidents, where they'll assign guys and move guys around based on circumstances and needs and whatnot. But for us, it's really, and this is one of the identifying marks of the Missouri Synod denominationally, is that we're very congregation centric.
Yeah,
So
I agree with
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
We're congregational, yeah, driven, but we agree to have synodical oversight.
yeah. So
Uh,
the congregation really drives the bus, but they work with the synod to make
yeah,
it happen. So
right.
anyways, let's just get into it. So congregation needs a pastor, so it could happen for a number of reasons. For example, the congregation down in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I hope they don't mind me talking about them, but their senior pastor is retiring, and so they're anticipating that, and they're looking to have a pastor in place by the end of the year so that they can have a smooth transition without a vacancy. Most of the time, a call process will happen because of a vacancy, where a pastor takes a call and goes somewhere else, or retires and is no longer serving, and then a congregation will either be served by a vacancy pastor or will be straight up vacant for a while. And in that process, the lay members of the congregation go through the call process. And so the call process looks like this. We need a pastor. So they reach out to the district president to initiate the process. And one of the first steps of the process is the congregation solicits names from the members of the church. The members of the church are allowed to submit LCMS pastors that they know of, that they think would be eligible, worthy candidates for serving in their congregation. And then along with that, the congregation asks for a list of names from the district president. Getting the list of names from the congregation members, they provide those to the district president, because the district president has to make sure those pastors are eligible to receive a call, both that they're on the roster of LCMS clergy, but also that their district president doesn't know of any reason why they shouldn't move. And so district presidents, if they're in a different district, they'll talk to each other and make sure, hey, is it okay if we give this guy's information to this congregation? And so once all those lists, both the lists that the district president might come up with from his awareness, he knows his congregations pretty well, and he's got an idea of what they're looking for. And maybe I missed a step where there's a congregational self-study that's done. So the district president knows what their strengths and weaknesses, opportunities, or things are going on. So he can say, hey, this is the kind of guy they need. And so he'll give a list of names, add to it the list of names that make it through that filtering process, submitted from the congregation. And then the congregation gets a list, and it's usually about a dozen guys, a dozen names on the list that the congregation call committee will then have to go through. And so they'll and from my having been served as kind of an advisory to call committees here at Trinity, and having been on the receiving end of a number of inquiries, which isn't the same as a call, that list is gone through and filtered by the call committee. They'll look at two documents that each pastor has tied to them: a personal information form and a self-evaluation tool. We call them a PIF and a SET, PIF and SET. And so those give personal information forms, more like the kind of the I don't know, demographics, the nuts and bolts of this guy's education history, talents, things like that. And then the SET, the self-evaluation tool, is more theological questions. It's something that the district offices encourage you to keep up to date as a pastor, so that it's fresh, it fits with your current views on ministry and your practices, but everything from your view on worship style preferences, to the role of women's service in the church, to outreach philosophies, things like that are you're asked to address them in a brief paragraph or so. And so the call committee, they got these 12 names, they're going through the list, and they say, all right, they maybe whittle it down to 6, and they'll say these 6 guys fit our needs. And here's where there's actually a lot of opportunities and options. And it's interesting, having been going through this process myself. One of my friends out in Pennsylvania, who's an LCMS pastor, he just posted a post about the clergy shortage in the synod, and moves to kind of counteract that. And it turned into a discussion about the call process. And so I was kind of watching the comments, and it was interesting to see there's some strong views of against what I think a lot of congregations do. A lot of pastors and some congregations even, I shouldn't say it like, please don't hear me as disparaging this. Well, they'll take those 6 names and they'll put them before the congregation, and they'll say, all right, guys, these are ones that we think are worthy from what we can see. This is a strength, weakness, and and then the congregation votes at that point. Most of the time, though, what happens is they whittle it down to those 6 names, and then they'll reach out, and if they haven't already in this process, they'll reach out to those 6 candidates and say, hey, we have your name, you're on a call list for us. Would you be willing to consider a call? And so most of the time that conversation then goes obviously yes or no. And if you're willing to consider a call, then they'll say, we'd love to schedule an interview with you. Now, just to give you a picture of how much need there is for pastors in our church body right now, in the last 3 years, I think I've been saying 20, but I think it's closer to 15 actually congregations that I've interviewed with. And this is me not looking for a call, and me being fairly reluctant to move and making that known even in the initial conversation, where I don't think I'm mobile at this time because of some circumstances, but I'm always willing to have a conversation, and we can learn through this process. And that's usually my line. But 15 times in the last 3 years, I've had that process take place. And so they'll schedule interviews, and a lot of times these days it's via Zoom, and or sometimes it's over the phone. I think that's how it used to be done before the COVID era. Predominantly, COVID shoved Zoom into our lives, and people are rolling with it. But anyways, at that point, the congregation has about an hour long call committee. Will talk with the pastor. They'll have a list of questions and get to know the pastor a little bit, and then from that they'll typically be able to narrow it down even further, and then bring a name or 2 or 3, depending on what their congregation constitution stipulates, because a lot of times it says you must bring at least 2 names to the congregation, but they'll bring some names to the congregation with a recommendation. And then at that point, the congregation makes a vote to call.
I want to stop there and
yeah, I just said a lot. Thanks for interrupting.
Well, could you repeat all that what you just said?
Yeah. I could also breathe if I took a break here.
Give me a break. Give me a chance to drink a cup of coffee. Now I'm going to ask you a dumb question. When did that practice, do you think, of the idea of a pre-interview for a candidate? When did that practice come in?
Yeah, I honestly can't speak authoritatively nor inform it, because I've only been doing this for 12 years myself, so I don't have a lot of traction. But I think it's a fairly novel thing, and from what I understand is it started and it was encouraged and I think it's almost insisted upon either by the pastor or the congregation or the district president in situations where there's a team ministry. And so there needs to be there needs to be some awareness that the pastors are going to get along, that they're going to have personalities that don't mix like oil and water, so that they can have a joyous ministry together. And I think that's where it started. When it became prevalent, I'm not sure, but I think one of the big influences that, and I want to talk more about this maybe at the end, if I don't get to it, we'll come back to what the difference between a call and a hiring process is. And I think the influences of the business world have not crept in the church necessarily in a negative sense, but have influenced the church towards that process of the interview. And so, yeah, timeline on that, but I know it wasn't unheard of, and I think it was the common thing. I think technology probably has a lot to do with this. The advent of being able to talk to people over the phone, and long distance rates going down, all that stuff. Just the ease of talking across the country, I think probably made this a more feasible thing, where back in the day, it wouldn't be unheard of to open your mail on a Wednesday morning and you got a call from a congregation that met on Sunday and you'd never even heard of them before. Because some of those steps that I mentioned along the way, they aren't necessary steps in this process. I I just talked to a brother pastor in the district here who had that happen to him. He said, "This is the first time it's ever happened. I got a call, a cold call, you know, you might call it, and just out of the blue, received the call documents in the mail, and then gets to consider it."
Well, wasn't the practice too early on in the synod where if you did receive a call and you took it, you didn't even go and actually visit the congregation. You just took the call and went.
Yeah, that's one of the things, and there's lots of stuff, like how
Right.
to go consider a call. That I've got a file folder on my computer that's been sitting there for over a decade because I've never had to use it, and I've been adding stuff to it that I've come across, call consideration stuff. And one of the things that's oft repeated is do not insist on a call or expect, or do not insist on a visit or expect the congregation to have you come visit. And I thought that was kind of interesting because that was part of my process, and they expected me to come. Um, but yeah, I can't imagine going sight unseen. But there's an
Right.
element that I think we lose in realizing the beauty of the call process and God's work in it when we start to load it with so many different human things. And um, we do believe that this is the work of the Holy Spirit, and He's working through the means of this process. That's a belief we have, and so we give credit to God, and we try to stay out of the way as much as possible. But I think one of the things I've been pondering through this call process is how much of our um, practices that we've added onto this, such as Zoom interviews, where you get to see whether I'm ugly or not, or rate of speech, all these things that you learn body language and stuff from watching it. It really influences people, and perhaps might keep them from calling somebody that could bring them something that they wouldn't get because they think this thing's not worth them having. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. And something too, as you were talking, I'm wondering, and I remember when, my 20 plus years I spent in Trinity Elmore. I remember the few times there when Pastor Lutz, he would announce to the congregation that he received a call and pray for him as he considers this. I remember the anxiety that was felt in the congregation over that process.
Yeah, yeah, I've been witnessing that from the pastoral end over the past couple weeks, and I honestly, I'll just be frank, one of my favorite things of the process is the amount of feedback I've gotten from the congregation. I've only had a handful of people that told me I should go, and I really appreciated it because they were saying it in love, and they had good reasons for it. And I obviously part of you is kind of offended. We're like, don't you want me to stay? But I think there is wisdom. Um, there's the reality that sometimes a pastor's sermons start to sound the same, or
Right.
the congregation learns how to tune them out because of that, or they just manifold conflicts, many little conflicts through the years might erode the trust relationship that is so paramount in a pastor congregation relationship. Those sorts of things are realities that we face in this sinful world, that clergy moving around sometimes is a benefit. And like I said, I grew up experiencing that. And when I got to my vicarage, that's another story for another day. We can talk about the vicarage placement process. I asked for a congregation where the pastor loved his people and the people loved his pastor. And I landed at a place where the pastor had been serving for 30 years. And it was night and day. And it opened my eyes to see that, you can have a healthy long-term pastorate. Now, granted, that does come with some difficulties for the pastors that follow a long-term pastorate. There's studies that show a pastor that follows a long tenured pastor, they're likely to only be there a couple, 3 years, because there's so much ingrained in the congregation's awareness of the pastor or expectations of the pastor that it's hard for them to adapt or accept a new pastor without a lot of difficulties. And so, anyways, that's yeah, it's something it's we got a lot of human stuff going on in this world.
But you're not doing it again. It's the thoughts are flying into my head at the moment. Um, because you take like the Methodist Church. I think they rotate their pastors every 5 or 7 years.
Yeah,
They have a forced rotation. But but you take like in the Missouri Synod, it's very common to hear about pastors that you just mentioned that have a 30-year tenure at a congregation. And I always wondered, is there pros and cons? Or is one better than the other? Or, is it like you talked about your dad had the 5-year itch. Um, I always wondered about is there some type of middle ground, or is the long-term pastorate at a congregation, is it the way to go, to establish? I don't know. It's
No, that's a good question, and it's something I've considered from time to time over the years. And I think there's two major factors in it. It's number one, uh, for lack of a better term, the leadership abilities of the pastor. And I don't like that term leadership in talking with the pastoral office a lot of times, but maybe just the conflict resolution abilities of a pastor. I think it's probably a big thing, and or the adaptability of a pastor. And I think to stay and be effective for a long term in a place, which, to be frank, I would love to do. I've said it since day
yeah,
one here at Trinity. I'd love to retire from this place, and not soon. But that I think you need to be willing um, to shoulder some burdens that come with being with people a long time. I think most people are aware that the biggest challenged relationships in their life are with the people they've known the longest, your family. And I think that those kinds of things come with a long tenure. And at the same time, I think it's if a congregation's makeup is changing, or a community's makeup is changing, a pastor's gifts and abilities may not be suited for that context. And so that's where adaptability for a long term, can be beneficial. But if a pastor can't, that's fine. And if a congregation is all over the map, so the one factor is the pastor's ability to be there a long time. And then the other thing is the congregation's ability to have a pastor for a long time. Because to be quite frank, some some congregations, they chew pastors up, and they're just not
yeah.
places where pastors can serve a long time.
No, that's interesting. So there's really nothing that's really cut and dry. So it's really depending
Yeah,
on the situation and the type of pastor. Some are probably better equipped to have those short-term runs to come in, fix things, or try to get things in a better direction and go on to the next problem. Or others have that long-term ability to, as you said, like conflict resolution. I could see where that'd be a huge advantage for someone who wants a long-term ministry. But
yeah,
you said something key though, is to shoulder the many years you're going to have at one congregation. You get to know the families, you baptize the kids, you marry the kids, you know those type of things. That's a whole different level that a pastor, um as Pastor Mark Lovett always talk about. He always said to me when I did my field work there, he goes, one of the things you're going to have to manage when you're at a congregation is to bear the burden of the weight of the ministry. At the time, as a field ed student, and even as a vicar, you don't feel that, but now when you are in a ministry, you do feel that weight. And
right.
and so it's there's a lot of things to consider. But one thing I want to ask you about too is we talked about the congregations and what they do in the process and that side of thing, and how it filters through the district and things. But you as an individual,
Hmm.
what were the things that you considered? I mean, it's probably not going to be the same for everybody, but for you, I imagine, what are the things do you think about? And I don't know if you want to
Yeah,
get how much you
no,
want to get into this. And
that's good, and that kind of picks up where we left off the process. We talking about the
yeah,
call process. The congregation votes to extend a call, and literally they send call documents to the pastor they're calling, and he receives them and reviews them, and now the ball is in his court. And this is, like we said, it's part of the process. It's, you could imagine they're in a parallel dimension. The congregation says this is a pastor we want, and then the district president says, all right, here he is. That would be
right.
a strange mix of a bishopric and a congregational autonomy meld. But anyways, so no, it's the pastor then gets to say yes or no to that call. And it's a very prayerful process, and I think that's one of the things that's crucial to it is praying, Lord, let me know, help me know where to go. And so, yeah, factors to consider it. It's for me, it boiled down to and I'll just talk about my call process. This has been announced yesterday at our congregation. There was 3 reasons I gave for turning down call to Bowling Green, Kentucky. The first reason was my family situation right now. I have a senior in high school and I have a sophomore in high school. And my sophomore in high school, I have a shared parenting plan with her that's very unique for a pastor, but she goes back and forth between her mom's house and my house every other week. And that's something that for the sake of considering the call, I set that aside as much as I could. And I'll be honest and say as much as I could, because it's always in my mind. She's my daughter. But that was my primary thing. I felt that my ability to parent at this important time in my daughter's life would be severely strained, because we talked about what that would look like. We have our senior stay up here with family, and my other daughter, we'd change the visitation schedule, and she'd probably come spend the summers with us. And you can imagine what that would be like for a high schooler, going to a new community where she doesn't know anybody and leaving her friends behind for a couple months out of the year. And so that was a big factor. Second factor was, and this was really what I think it helped me make what I felt like was my primary obstacle, stay that primary obstacle. And the second thing was that I did not perceive that the needs of the congregation in Holy Trinity in Bowling Green, Kentucky, exceeded the needs that I'm meeting and have to meet here at Trinity in Toledo. And
Gotcha.
that's a laundry list of just things that would be asked of me as a pastor. And that's hard to quantify, and that, to be honest, was more of just a sense of basically boiled down to, for me, is which place is going to take more work for me. And this might sound flippant or even naive, but I felt that there's more work for me to do here at Trinity than there would be for me to do down at Holy Trinity in Bowling Green.
Okay. No, that's
And
interesting. I just
and
I imagine that.
the third one, real quick, was just
Yeah.
it was financial. The cost of living down there in Bowling Green and the housing market was significantly higher than it is in Toledo, and that's a reality that I said I've had 10 or 15 inquiries in the last 3 years, and with each of them, just curiously, I look at the housing market there, and it's astounding. I mean, I feel like I might be stuck in Toledo forever unless the parish has either a plan to bring a pastor in with some financial assistance, or a parsonage, some way to make housing affordable for a pastor, because Toledo's housing market is among the lowest in the country, and everywhere else is astronomically higher.
No, that's something too, because it used to be for years that churches usually had a parsonage.
Mm-hmm.
Then they kind of got away from that because pastors, if they did receive a call someplace else, they wanted to carry some equity with them, and that makes sense too.
Yep.
But then when you get now, we're in a situation where, as you just mentioned, housing is kind of on the crazy side of things.
Yeah,
Where
it's
it's
quite a
nice if you wish you
disparate
had a
thing.
parish or a parsonage with a church.
Right.
So it, yeah, I guess there's no easy answers with all this, is there?
Yeah, and there was one congregation that was really after me in the interviews, and they called me back for a second interview, and I told them, I said, look guys, I'm looking at houses out there I can't afford it. They said, well, we have a parsonage right next door to the church. I said, well, I guess if you want to call me, go ahead. And they didn't end up calling me. I think they could see through that there was more reasons, and
Right.
but that was interesting. And yeah.
Well, to close out our talk, how do you, at that point, the proper way to now, you went through the process, you did a very thorough consideration. You gave the calling congregation your time, which I think is awesome. It's a respectful thing to do, to respect the process that we have.
Right.
But when you go to make that decision, what does that look like? When you actually begin to let people know.
Yeah, well, let me give you a twofold answer to that, because I gave you the factors that led me to my decision, but part of the process in considering the decision is when we went down and visited Bowling Green, Katie went with me, my wife, because she's an important person in my life making
Yeah.
decisions like this, and we really set our minds on going. We said, let's act as if we're going. Let's start to talk about what that would look like, and we started to live, at least in our minds, as if that was our decision, was to go, and how will I serve here? And then so lived with that for a while. and honestly, it didn't sit well with me. It just felt like I was abandoning my duties as a father for it's the reasons I mentioned earlier. Is anyways, and then kind of after that, I said, well, let's think about this with Holy Trinity in mind, knowing what they would need of me and what I would have the opportunities to do there. Thinking about just continuing at Trinity, and after thinking about that, I just felt at peace. And it's not a feeling based things, and I've got a lot of good counsel, from documents and from friends, that this isn't God doesn't beam the answer into your head. There is the reality that He does influence us and give us His Holy Spirit's wisdom and guidance, but there are these practical human things that we can observe, and the Holy Spirit works through those to give us guidance in that. So after kind of settling my mind back to, okay, I'll stay at Trinity, felt comfortable enough with that. So now to announce that decision to the congregation, I mean, there's literally a set of documents that were in my hand until this morning, and this morning I wrote a letter and made a couple notes for Holy Trinity and sent that back to them, literally returning the call to them, so that I don't hold that call anymore. They now go back to, not back to the drawing board. Hopefully they got another good name on their list they can consider. But kind of holding that. Today's Thursday as we're recording this, because we have a circuit meeting on Monday, and we're trying to be out here for you. Anyways, the congregation will find out on Sunday. And so I've been quietly in conversations, just letting people know if they ask me. If you don't mind keeping it to yourself, I'll let you know. This is my intentions to announce on Sunday, and but yeah, announcing it to the congregation as a whole is the way to do it. And that's the same thing on the front end of the process. It was a rough week, the week I had the call before I announced it to Trinity, because I was just chewing on all the information coming my way and praying about a lot of things, and people didn't know it was stressing me out. I had Bible study that morning. On September 17th, I had some people reflect to me this past weekend. Hey, last week we now know why you were so stressed out during Bible study, because I walked in and it's kind of just slap happy. But anyways, yeah. So that's where that's at.
And it's also, I think it's important too. I think when that process has been, prayerfully thought over, and you reach the end of that decision, and say you decide to stay where you're at, to keep praying for the calling congregation that they will find somebody.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that's another one of my favorite things about this process is it helps our congregation see a sister congregation that's in need. And quite frankly, our congregation was going through we might be in need in a couple weeks here if he accepts this call. So you really start to think sympathetically for the other congregations around us, and helps remind us that the work of the Lord is not just here in Toledo. It's all over the world. And
right.
And so we pray that the Lord would send workers for the harvest, and that's huge.
No, that's all good stuff. I appreciate that you sharing all this with us.
No, I appreciate being able to talk about it. It's easy to talk about myself. There's a couple. One, I said I wanted to come back to it if we didn't get to it, but
yeah,
I'll throw it to you first, and you can throw it back to me as quick as you want. But what do you think the difference between the hiring process and the call process is? The business world and the church office.
I think I think what it is that when you're doing a hiring practice, and I worked in corporate America for 20 years, so I'm very familiar with that. They look at the individual as an employee who's going to provide a service. I mean, that's about where it's at. I mean, it's just somebody's going to come in, provide a service, and you're going to pay them for that service. It's really at that level.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of benefit you're going to get from hiring this person to the company? Where I think with the call process, it works on our different parameters. For one, the call is the office of the Holy Ministry is a divine thing.
Yeah.
From God Himself. That right there changes the whole conversation. It's apples and oranges. I think one of the worst mistakes a congregation can do, and if I were confronted, I would try to correct this, is that when you're in the calling process, you don't treat that pastor you're calling as an employee. That man has been called by God to fill an office that's been set up by God.
Mhm.
And in his ordination vows, he makes vows to fulfill duties that required of that office. You know, it's a scripture of the scriptures in the book of Concord. And so though it's a different, so when you're hiring, hiring, here I go. When you're calling a pastor, um, you want to find, I think the first thing a calling congregation should look for in that pastor when they're calling him is he faithful to his ordination vows?
Yep.
Because the congregation is the one who holds the office. There, and you're calling a man to fill that office. You want someone who's going to be faithful to that office, to his vows that he made to God.
Right.
That's a huge difference between the hiring process
Yeah. Yeah.
and how
And
we
there's
understand things.
two significant things too that you didn't mention that are maybe just understood or maybe not even realized at times, is that pastors don't apply for these things.
Right.
So we don't go to a job board and say, hey, I'd like to move to Bowling Green, Kentucky, or that's not how it works. If a pastor finds himself in a situation where feels he's being ineffective because of for whatever reasons, he can let his district president know, hey, put me on lists, and that's usually the extent of the job seeking for a pastor can goes, and then you continue serving until the Lord calls you elsewhere. And even then, I've heard of guys who are like, I need to be out of this place for the XYZ reasons, but they get calls and they're like, no, this is where I still need to be compared to that place, and they'll just wait until the Lord leads them to where their next place of service is. So that the fact that it's not applied for by the pastors, that's a huge difference. The other thing too, and sometimes this is hard for congregations to realize, is you can't fire your pastor.
Right.
There's this, and that plays into this, isn't a hired worker. But the only reason you would get rid of a pastor is if he's not um, basically gross misconduct, or abandoning his ordination vows, false teaching, and that's a messy process and necessary when
Right.
it's taking place.
Yeah.
But it's not like you can just say, all right, we've had enough of Pastor Kleimola, it's time to ask him to move on.
Okay. No, that's good stuff. I'm just going to mention one more thing. It's kind of stuck with me when you said that. You made the comment about, I still feel like there's work that needs to be done.
Yeah,
I
like there would ever not need work to be done.
but
Yeah.
but in that sense, though, you got this understanding that there's more work that needs to be done in Toledo at Trinity, and I just find that a fascinating comment. Uh, I don't know if you want to wish to unpack that or not. We'll talk about it over lunch sometime. But you and I, we need to talk about that, because I think that's interesting that you feel that there's that desire that things are still not done to where they need to be.
All right. Yeah.
And I mean, I get that here at Concordia too. I feel like there's so much work that needs to be done yet.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that comment.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, that's good. And this is the Lord's church. And
yeah.
maybe just to drop some Bible in here, because we haven't mentioned a single Bible reference.
No, we
But
haven't.
one of the few places we see a call process, if you will, is in when Judas is being replaced in Acts chapter 1. And it's through the casting of lots, and they prayed and cast lots. They literally rolled dice to see which guy should replace Judas. And I was listening to Issues Etc. episode, where one of the district presidents was talking about the call process, and he said he's familiar with one congregation that he's heard of in the Synod that actually does that process for the call process, and he commended them for it. And I think it's kind of an incredible act of faith to say, Lord, you know who you're going to give us. We're going to trust you completely in this. And it might
Right.
sound naive and what do you call it? Kind of fantastic in a pejorative sense to do that this way, but really this is our faith. We trust God is in control of his church. And so whatever way we get a pastor delivered to our doorstep, we're going to know that the Lord is at work in the process, and try to stay out of the way as much as possible.
Yeah, just to end on a good note, that our process is not perfect. You only hear about the bad things that go wrong with it. But over the 175 years or so, whatever it might be, the life of the Synod, overall, it's worked incredibly well.
Yeah.
It really has, and it does show God's hand in that process. It's I hear 100 times more stories about how God delivered the right guy at our doorstep when we needed him.
Yeah.
It just it's one of those amazing things, and it's one of the wonderful things you hear.
Yeah.
Uh,
And I'll be Debbie Downer too, though. But I think every congregation needs to be reminded that no matter which pastor they get, they're getting a sinner.
right. Yeah,
And
that's true.
the Lord
Yeah.
works through them. So
Yeah, the Lord works through that. That's right. No.
so
Well, again, thank you very much for sharing all of that. That was quite informative.
yeah, no, appreciate the opportunity. And if you got any questions, we'd love to hear from you as always. And hope this is a blessing to you as the Lord sustains you in your life with Him through the work of the pastor that He's given you.
And just kind of a heads up, we do have a pastors conference coming up in October, so we're not going to be able to broadcast that week unless we do something remote. So
Yeah,
just a heads up to
that's why we
everybody.
decided to do a pre-recorded here for
Yeah,
get ahead of get ahead of some weeks off of offline, not off work.
yeah.
So yeah. So all right. Well, we'll see you when we see you, and pray God's blessings upon you.
Yes. Blessings to you. Bye bye.